It was 4:07 a.m. when Professor Ethan Blake's key clicked into the lock of his office door. The corridors of Harvard's Jefferson Hall were bathed in silence, broken only by the occasional hum of an old radiator and the squeak of his leather shoes against the polished floors. He wasn't supposed to be there. A delayed red-eye flight from San Francisco had landed early, and instead of heading home, Ethan, ever the creature of habit, decided to drop by his office. His mind was still tangled in a mess of equations from a conference paper he'd half finished on the plane. Maybe he could clear his head with some quiet. What he didn't expect was the sound of chalk scratching against the board in Lecture Hall B. He stopped in his tracks, listening. The rhythm was unmistakable, short strokes, hesitations, then longer, sweeping arcs. Not random doodling. This was methodical. Purposeful. Cautiously, he crept down the hall, the hallway lights flickering overhead like some bad horror film trope. As he peered through the narrow window of the lecture hall door, his brows furrowed in disbelief. There, under the cool fluorescent lights, stood a young black woman in a janitor's uniform, baggy navy pants, oversized gray sweatshirt, and a Harvard facilities badge clipped to her waistband. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her back was turned toward him as she scribbled furiously across the massive chalkboard. Equations, no, partial differential equations, and complex vector notations, sprawled across the board in organized chaos. She paused, tapped the chalk against her chin, then stepped back and corrected a term in the lower corner. Ethan blinked, thinking maybe it was the jet lag. Then she moved toward the adjacent board, uncapped a whiteboard marker, and continued a sequence that made his jaw tighten in recognition. These weren't copied notes. She was solving. Working through something. Deep, graduate-level material, stuff that gave even his PhD candidates cold sweats. He opened the door gently. It creaked. She spun around, startled, marker still in hand. For a second, her face went white with fear. I'm sorry. I didn't mean, I was just, she looked down, scrambling to cap the marker, her eyes darting to the floor as though bracing for punishment. I'll clean it off right now. Please don't report me. Ethan raised both hands. Hey. It's okay. You're not in trouble. I wasn't expecting anyone here. She clutched the rag in her other hand so tightly her knuckles turned pale. I was just killing time. I always clean this wing last. Less foot traffic. He took a cautious step closer, eyes scanning the equation trail. You wrote all this? She hesitated. Yes. He pointed to a section near the middle. That's a corrected variation on Lagrange's identity. You modified the coefficients. A quiet nod. That's not something you just write at 4 a.m. Silence. What's your name? Nia. Nia Robinson. He offered a hand. Professor Ethan Blake. Applied mathematics. She didn't take it right away. But then she gave his hand a quick, reluctant shake, before pulling back. Nice to meet you, sir. He turned to the board again. You made an error here, though, he said, almost teasingly. You dropped a negative sign when you subtracted the gradient. Nia stepped forward instinctively, eyes narrowing. No, I didn't. Look here, since I redefined the scalar field in the prior step, the negative cancels out when you apply the divergence theorem. Ethan stared for a beat. Then he chuckled, low and disbelieving. I'll be damned. You're right. She looked away again, biting her lower lip. I should go. But Ethan didn't move. He was staring at the rest of her work, his brain scanning faster now, piecing together the logic. This wasn't some fluke. These were layered thoughts. Ideas. Where did you learn this? She shrugged. Books. Mostly the ones you all leave behind after class. Sometimes I borrow textbooks from the basement library when the night librarian's not looking. He ran a hand through his graying hair. Have you studied math formally? She gave a half laugh, a bitter little sound. 2 semesters at Roxbury Community College. Then my foster mom got sick. I dropped out, took the janitor job for the benefits. That was 4 years ago. Ethan leaned against a desk, crossing his arms. So you're self-taught? I guess. She looked down at her worn sneakers. It's just something that makes sense to me. A moment of stillness passed. Then he said, how would you feel about solving something for me? Nia looked up warily. Why? Because I want to see what happens when someone who just understands takes a swing at something even my postdocs are struggling with. She hesitated. You're serious? I wouldn't be standing here at 4 a.m. if I wasn't. Ethan pulled a notebook from his coat pocket, flipping to a page covered in messy pen scratches. He tore it out and handed it to her. Take your time. You don't have to do it now. But if you're interested. Nia took the paper like it was made of glass. Her eyes scanned the problem, and something flickered in her expression, a mixture of fear and intrigue. A fire she hadn't let burn for years. I'll see what I can do. He nodded. You know where to find me. Ethan turned to leave, pausing in the doorway. And Nia? She looked up. Don't ever apologize for being curious. She didn't answer, but her posture shifted, just slightly, as if the burden on her shoulders had lightened by a single ounce. Outside in the hall, Ethan exhaled deeply. What had just happened wasn't a coincidence. It was a crack in the system, a hidden genius cleaning floors in a building full of scholars. And he had a choice to make. Help her step through that crack, or let the world stay blind. He glanced back once more at the chalkboard behind her, now covered in ideas that danced between brilliance and beauty. And he whispered, mostly to himself, Harvard has no idea what just walked through its doors. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Nia Robinson had learned early on that people rarely looked twice at the janitor. She'd become a ghost in these hallways, a quiet presence sweeping floors in buildings that echoed with the voices of future senators, Nobel laureates, and venture capitalists. But being invisible had its perks. No one noticed if she lingered too long in the math department's recycling bins, fishing out lecture notes or discarded textbooks. No one questioned why she swept slower in classrooms with chalkboards still covered in equations. And no one cared if she stayed past her shift, so long as everything was clean by sunrise. She'd gotten good at keeping her head down. At disappearing. But when Professor Blake asked for her name, something old stirred inside her. Something she had buried. Nia Robinson. A name she hadn't said out loud in a classroom since she was 19. Back then, life had looked a little different. She was a scholarship kid at Roxbury Community College, breezing through calculus and differential equations with the ease of someone born to numbers. Her professors praised her intuition. She spent her nights watching MIT OpenCourseWare, scribbling furiously in composition notebooks while her younger brother Marque snored on the mattress beside hers in their shared room. Her goal had been simple: transfer to a 4-year university, maybe teach one day. She didn't want much. Just a desk. A chalkboard. A room where ideas mattered more than last names. But dreams were expensive. When her foster mother, Miss Lorraine, got sick, cancer that moved faster than doctors could treat, Nia had to make a choice. There wasn't anyone else. Marque was still in high school, and the rent wasn't going to pay itself. So she dropped out. She cleaned offices during the day and grocery stores at night. When the Harvard job opened up, night janitor, full benefits, stable hours, she jumped at it. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept Marque fed, kept the lights on, kept her moving. She told herself the dream could wait. But the dream never really left. The first time she wandered into Jefferson Hall after a lecture had ended, it had been accidental. A half-cleaned room. Chalk dust still hanging in the air. On the board was a string of equations she didn't recognize, dense, abstract math that seemed more art than logic. Her brain lit up. She took a photo on her old phone and tried to decode it later in the break room, scribbling notes on napkins between mopping floors. Soon, it became routine. She learned the professor's teaching schedules. She memorized names from syllabi left behind. She studied in silence, long after her coworkers clocked out, when the only audience was the hum of vending machines and the moonlight bouncing off marble floors. She told no one. Not even Marque. Marque wouldn't understand. He was busy surviving high school, dodging gang recruiters and trying not to get suspended again. He had too many of his own battles to worry about his sister pretending she still belonged in a classroom. But the need never left her. It burned slow and low, a hunger that crept in during the quiet hours of night. Nia didn't know what made her stay so long that particular evening, maybe the weight of the day, maybe a puzzle she couldn't quite crack. But she'd been mid-proof, caught in that beautiful place where time disappears, when the door creaked and a tall white man in a trench coat stepped in. At first, she'd panicked. She knew who he was. Everyone in the building knew Ethan Blake, brilliant, intimidating, a little eccentric. Students whispered about his impossible lectures and the theory he'd developed in his 20s that landed him in the Journal of Mathematical Physics. A janitor solving equations on his board? That was the stuff of warnings. Infractions. Job loss. But he hadn't yelled. He'd asked for her name. He'd listened. And then he gave her a problem to solve. Now, hours later, she sat cross-legged on the floor of the break room, staring at the sheet of paper he'd handed her. She'd cleaned the entire floor, vacuumed the rugs, emptied the bins. But she couldn't leave. Not yet. The equation gnawed at her. It wasn't like the classroom problems she'd memorized. It was raw. Unfiltered. Something from the front lines of mathematical research. He wasn't testing her. He was inviting her. And that terrified her more than anything. What if she solved it wrong? Worse, what if she solved it right? What then? She couldn't just become someone else. She was still Nia, the janitor. The girl who hadn't seen the inside of a classroom in 5 years. The one who patched her work shoes with duct tape and kept her textbooks in a milk crate under her bed. People like her didn't get second chances. People like her didn't become mathematicians. But still, her fingers itched. So she reached for her notebook. The next 3 hours passed in silence, save for the scratch of her pen and the occasional creak of the old vending machine. She didn't look at the clock. She didn't need to. There was only the problem, the rhythm of thought, and the soft thrill that came when a line clicked into place and the answer began to shimmer just out of reach. By the time the sun began to bleed into the sky, she'd filled 12 pages. Her brain was humming. Her limbs ached. But she had something close to a solution. She stared at it, half in awe, half in fear. It wasn't perfect. But it was hers. She tucked the pages into a folder, wiped the board clean, and wheeled her cart into the supply closet like nothing had happened. Just another shift. Just another night. But the air around her felt different now. A door had opened. Whether she dared to walk through it was another question entirely. Before she left the building, she scribbled a small note and slid it under Professor Blake's door. She didn't know what compelled her to write it, but it felt like the kind of thing a version of herself, long buried, would have said. Thanks for seeing me. Here's my best attempt. Nia. And then she stepped out into the cool dawn, her mind still buzzing, her heart unsure if it should be racing toward hope or away from it. The city was waking up, indifferent as always. Buses groaned to life. Delivery trucks rumbled past shuttered storefronts. But for the first time in years, Nia felt like maybe, just maybe, the world had noticed her. Just once. And maybe that was enough. For now. Professor Ethan Blake didn't sleep that night. Not because he wasn't tired, he was. The transcontinental flight, the 4 a.m. discovery, the fact that his world had just tilted on its axis. But his mind wouldn't let him rest. It kept circling back to the image of a janitor, Nia, solving a problem that had stumped some of his best graduate students. Not copying. Not guessing. Solving. Thoughtfully. Elegantly. With the kind of intuitive leap that you can't teach, only recognize. By 7 a.m., he was at his desk, mug of bitter black coffee steaming beside him. Nia's 12 pages lay neatly on the table, stapled and creased. He had read them twice. Then a third time. There were imperfections. She had skipped a couple of formalities, some notation was unorthodox, but the logic? Sound. The insight? Startling. She hadn't just answered the question. She'd taken it a step further. She'd redefined the way one of the functionals interacted with a variable set, something Ethan himself had toyed with in passing but never fully explored. It wasn't textbook. It was creative. That was what stuck with him. There were plenty of students at Harvard who could recite theorems. Plenty who had memorized entire frameworks of modern mathematics. But what Nia had shown was something else entirely, a gift for seeing what wasn't there. A sense of play in her problem-solving, of stubborn persistence and graceful maneuvering. And she'd never finished community college. He sat back in his chair, staring at the morning sun slicing through the blinds, and felt the beginnings of something he hadn't felt in years, wonder. It was risky, what he was considering. Bringing someone like her into the academic fold without the usual credentials, it went against protocol. Harvard wasn't exactly known for embracing the unconventional when it came to admissions or academic participation. There were hoops, systems, politics. And if word got out that he was mentoring a janitor without a degree, there'd be questions. Some ugly. But still. He'd spent the past 2 decades surrounded by ambition dressed in privilege. Students who spoke in polished bullet points. Who name-dropped summer internships and came from prep schools with their own observatories. And yet none of them had done what Nia had done. He pulled out a blank notepad and scribbled one line. Genius doesn't ask for permission. Later that day, in his seminar with his advanced calculus students, sharp, competitive kids mostly destined for Wall Street or Stanford PhDs, he couldn't stop thinking about her. He watched them debate over a boundary problem with the usual mixture of speed and arrogance, but it all felt dull in comparison. They had training. They had access. But did they have hunger? After class, as the students packed up, Ethan lingered at the board. He grabbed a piece of chalk and, with calm precision, wrote out a new equation. One that even he hadn't finished working through yet. He stepped back and looked at it like a man lighting a fuse. Then he left it there. That night, Nia returned like clockwork. Same mop, same uniform. But something in her step had changed. Lighter. Hesitant, but expectant. The building whispered in its usual way, pipes clanking, floorboards sighing. But when she passed Lecture Hall B and saw the chalkboard, she stopped cold. The equation was there. No name. No note. Just a question waiting to be answered. She dropped her cleaning cart by the wall and stepped in. For a long moment, she stood staring at the problem. It was more complicated than the last one, multivariable integrals, boundary constraints, elements of chaotic systems. But it wasn't the math that made her heartbeat skip. It was the challenge. A silent dare from someone who saw her. She got to work. The next morning, Ethan arrived early again. He told himself it was because of a faculty meeting, but he knew better. The board was filled, edge to edge. Nia had not only attempted the problem, she'd wrestled with it until it told her the truth. Her handwriting was rushed, compact, and full of crossings out, arrows, and boxed-in thoughts. But it was brilliant. Unpolished, raw brilliance. He snapped a photo. This time, he left a note taped to the board. "You're not invisible. Let's talk. Office 3B, anytime after 3 p.m. EB." Nia found it at the end of her shift. She read it once, then again. Her first instinct was to run. Hide. Let this whole thing fade like a dream. But the handwriting, clean, slanted, certain, held her still. She didn't go to his office that day. Or the next. But on the third day, just after 3:12 p.m., she stood in front of door 3B, hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped her backpack. She had dressed as best she could, clean jeans, an oversized Harvard hoodie someone had left in the laundry room, hair braided back neatly. She'd even put on a little lip balm, for reasons she couldn't explain. She knocked once. "Come in," Ethan's voice called. She pushed the door open and stood there, stiff as a board. Ethan looked up from his desk and smiled warmly. "You came." Yeah. I didn't want to interrupt." "You're not interrupting," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Please. Sit." She did, gingerly, like the chair might break under her. He didn't speak at first. Just pushed a folder across the table. Inside were printouts. Photos of her board work. Notes. Highlights. "I've shown this to 2 of my colleagues," he said. "Remove the name. Just the work. They both assumed it was from one of my doctoral candidates." Nia stared at the papers. "I want to help you," he continued. "Not in a charity way. Not as a project. But because you belong in this world. And you've been locked out for too long." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't have the money. Or a degree. I never even took linear algebra formally." Ethan leaned forward. "Do you think Einstein paid tuition when he rewrote physics in a Swiss patent office? Do you think credentials make brilliance?" She blinked, unsure if she was about to laugh or cry. "I can't promise it'll be easy," he added. "Harvard isn't built for outliers. But if you're willing, I'll find a way to get you in, officially or not. For now, just come. Sit in. Engage. Let them hear you." She looked at the board behind him. Equations danced like ghosts across the green slate. "And what if they don't want to hear me?" He smiled. "Then we make it impossible for them not to." That evening, Nia sat in the back row of Ethan's advanced seminar. No mop. No uniform. Just her, a notebook, and a quiet fire in her chest. The students barely noticed her at first. But when Ethan opened the class with, "Let's revisit that equation from yesterday. Nia, care to walk us through your process?" The room went still. All eyes turned. And Nia Robinson stood. Not the janitor. Not the invisible girl. But a mathematician in the making. Nia Robinson had never felt so exposed. As she stepped toward the whiteboard, the classroom fell under a hush so complete it was almost oppressive. The sound of her sneakers brushing against the tile floor echoed like thunder. She could feel the eyes of every student in the room tracking her, watching the janitor stand in front of a board where they had drawn diagrams and debated theorems just the week before. This wasn't her world. Not yet. She uncapped the marker with hands that trembled just slightly and turned back to face the equation Ethan had written. The same one she had tackled in the quiet hours of the night when no one was watching. It looked different now, bolder under the fluorescence, menacing under scrutiny. But she recognized its spine. She knew where it wanted to go. A few students in the front row exchanged glances, eyebrows raised. One of them, tall, polished, the kind who probably summered in Nantucket, whispered something behind his hand. Another stifled a smirk. Ethan saw it all but said nothing. He simply leaned against his desk, arms crossed, gaze fixed on her with an unreadable expression. Nia swallowed hard. She drew the first line. Clear. Steady. Then another. Her voice was soft, but each word was precise. So the core of this problem is really in the way the field collapses along the boundary. You can't solve it cleanly with standard eigenfunction decomposition unless you redefine the interior constraints, here, using an adaptive variable substitution. She pointed to a piece of the equation. I introduced a modified scalar transformation to preserve continuity. That's why the delta doesn't explode. Dead silence. Then a voice from the second row, a girl with horn-rimmed glasses and a laptop full of stickers, leaned forward. Wait. You're saying you used a rotating field constraint? Wouldn't that break the symmetry? Nia looked at her. Not defensive. Just focused. It would, if you approached it linearly. But I used an iterative dampening method and forced asymmetry to absorb the singularity. I can show you. She turned back to the board and added a diagram. It wasn't just right. It was elegant. The math flowed like music. When she finished, no one spoke for several seconds. Then Ethan said, "Can someone explain what Nia just did?" Hands slowly went up. The girl with the glasses offered, "It's like she bent the math around itself. I've only seen that kind of manipulation in Dr. Reinhardt's fluid dynamics course." Nantucket boy cleared his throat. That's not how we were taught to handle collapse boundaries. She's not handling it how you were taught, Ethan replied. She's handling it how it works. A flicker of indignation passed across the student's face, but he said nothing more. Ethan looked at Nia. Thank you. That was extraordinary. Nia didn't know what to do with the praise. Her instinct was to disappear. To vanish back into a corridor with her mop. But the look on Ethan's face, and the stunned silence of the room, held her there a moment longer. When she sat back down, her breath was shallow. Her heart thundered in her chest. A few minutes later, the seminar ended. Students filed out slowly, buzzing now with that peculiar mixture of confusion and curiosity that only arises when the expected order of things has been challenged. As the room emptied, the girl with the glasses lingered. "I'm Jordan," she said, offering her hand. Nia shook it. That was wild. Like, actually wild. Are you a transfer student or something? No. Nia hesitated, unsure of how to answer. Ethan chimed in. She's auditing the course for now. Jordan raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Well, it was cool. Maybe we can compare notes sometime. Nia nodded, surprised. Sure. Yeah. Jordan smiled and left. When the door finally closed behind her, Nia looked at Ethan. That was intense. He chuckled. You handled it better than most under pressure. They looked at me like I didn't belong. That's because they've been trained to think in straight lines. You're drawing circles around them. Nia gave a faint smile but didn't quite believe it. Ethan paused. They'll come around. Maybe not today. But eventually. I don't think they're the only ones I have to worry about, she said. He nodded. You're right. The faculty, the administration, they won't understand right away. Then why are you doing this? Why are you helping me? Ethan leaned back against the desk, gazed distant for a moment. Because someone once did the same for me. That surprised her. Ethan Blake didn't seem like the type to need help. I was a mess at your age. Angry. Poor. Working the night shift in a call center while trying to teach myself Fourier transforms. I got caught sneaking into a physics lecture at MIT. The professor didn't kick me out. He gave me a scholarship. He smiled, soft and a little sad. Everyone needs someone to hold the door open. That stuck with her. Later, as she made her way back to the supply closet to clock out, her heart was still pounding, but there was a new rhythm in it now. One that pulsed not just with fear, but with something almost dangerous. Hope. But the halls of academia are not kind to disruptions. Word spreads fast at Harvard, especially when something doesn't fit the mold. And by the next day, a quiet murmur had begun. A janitor solving problems in Blake's seminar? Auditing a graduate-level course without being enrolled? Who signed off on that? In faculty lounges and between hushed conversations in hallways, questions began bubbling. Some were curious. Others were not. Dr. Langston from Pure Math scowled when he heard. This isn't a charity. Harvard is not a place for unvetted prodigies. It's a place of standards. Even Ethan's closest colleague, Dr. Murakami, raised an eyebrow when he saw the photo Ethan had taken of Nia's work. It's impressive, he admitted, but if you push this too fast, you'll make enemies. The system doesn't like being challenged. I'm not trying to challenge the system, Ethan said. Dr. Murakami gave him a look. Fine, Ethan admitted. Maybe I am. But he didn't care. Because something was happening. Something real. And it had started at 4 a.m., with a chalkboard, a mop bucket, and a girl who couldn't stop solving problems, even if no one had given her permission to try. By the end of the week, Nia Robinson's name was on more lips than she cared to know. Not openly, of course. No one at Harvard gossiped like high schoolers, at least not out loud. But there was a look, a tone, a subtle shift in how people entered a room when she was in it. Whispers just a second too late to be covered by coughs. Conversations that halted as soon as she passed by. At first, Nia thought she was imagining it. Maybe it was just her nerves. Maybe the anxiety in her chest, the knot that had refused to untangle ever since she stood in front of that classroom, was twisting her perception. But then came the stares. In Ethan Blake's seminar, no one said anything directly. But the usual energy, the lively back-and-forth debates, the collaborative problem-solving, had cooled. The questions posed to Nia weren't just skeptical anymore. They were tactical. One student, a sharp-tongued econ dual major named Greg, tried to pin her on a proof mid-lecture. But what about the convergence criteria? Did you even test for divergence at infinity? He asked with just enough sugar in his tone to sound polite. Nia stared at the board, jaw clenched. She had. Of course she had. She began reciting the criteria, walking him through the math. But he wasn't listening. He was looking at her like she didn't belong. After class, she overheard someone mutter, "Is she even enrolled? Or is this Blake's latest experiment?" The words hit like a slap. By Friday, her confidence had started to unravel. She found herself second-guessing even basic calculations. She stayed up late reviewing textbook chapters she already knew by heart. Her shifts became heavier, she worked harder, mopped faster, like she could scrub away the tension that followed her. And still, she couldn't stop remembering how it had felt to stand at the front of that classroom. Not the fear. Not the eyes. But the thrill. The way the numbers had come alive under her fingers. That part was real. And no rumor could take it from her. Still, the pressure kept building. The tipping point came the following week. She was in the hallway outside Jefferson Hall, arms full of her cleaning supplies, when she saw a man in a navy suit speaking with one of the admin staff. He looked out of place, too polished, too practiced. She caught only a bit of the conversation. Blake's behavior is becoming unconventional, he was saying. There are concerns about standards. About access. The staffer nodded nervously. Yes, sir. I understand. Then his eyes slid toward Nia. Just briefly. But she felt it. They were talking about her. That night, she skipped the seminar. Instead, she stayed late in the custodial closet, pretending to sort supplies. Her hands trembled as she wrapped cords and rearranged bottles of bleach. Anything to distract her from the dread. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Ethan. Missed you today. Let me know if you're okay. She stared at it for a long time, then shoved the phone back in her pocket without replying. What was she doing? She wasn't a student here. She didn't belong. She was a janitor, not a mathematician. Ethan wasn't surprised when Nia didn't show. But he was disappointed. Not in her, but in the institution around them. He'd known there would be pushback. But he had underestimated how quickly the walls would close in. The department chair had already asked for a friendly conversation that week. The tone had been civil. The message, less so. You're making waves, Ethan. And while we appreciate your passion for outreach, we have to consider the precedent this sets. If anyone with a chalkboard and a late-night shift can attend graduate seminars, where does it end? Ethan had kept his temper in check. But just barely. Where does it end? He wanted to ask. Hopefully, with us finally recognizing genius when it stands right in front of us in work shoes and a name tag. But he knew better than to shout. Instead, he quietly prepared for what was coming. Nia didn't go to class the next day either. Or the day after. Instead, she worked. She cleaned. She faded. Until Thursday night. She was mopping the floor outside Lecture Hall B when she heard a voice. Nia. It was Jordan, the girl with the horn-rimmed glasses. She stood in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder. You okay? Nia straightened. Yeah. Just, working. You haven't been in class. Everyone noticed. Nia shrugged. Maybe I'm not supposed to be there. Jordan frowned. Says who? Does it matter? Nia muttered. They're never going to see me as one of them. Jordan stepped closer. Look. I've been here long enough to know when someone's got the spark. You do. Honestly. You make some of us look like we've been coasting. That freaks people out. Nia blinked. So what, I'm supposed to just ignore it? You're supposed to keep showing up, Jordan said simply. Because whether they like it or not, you've earned your seat. Then she tossed something into Nia's mop bucket and walked off. It was a folded piece of paper. Tomorrow's seminar topic. On the back, Jordan had written. You solve problems better than you think. So stop running. We need you. Nia didn't sleep that night. She spent hours pacing her small apartment, Malik already passed out on the couch, headphones in. She kept staring at the seminar topic. It was dense, brutally dense. A challenge. A wall. And something inside her rose to meet it. By dawn, her notebook was full again. When she walked into Jefferson Hall the next afternoon, she wore her Harvard hoodie again. No mop. No name tag. Students paused. Whispers resumed. But she ignored them. She took her seat near the front this time. When Ethan walked in and saw her, his eyes lit up just slightly. He didn't say anything. Just nodded. And Nia nodded back. She was here. Not because someone let her in. But because she belonged. It was close to midnight when Ethan Blake received the message that would change everything. He'd stayed late in his office again, buried in a stack of peer review notes and a draft of his upcoming paper on adaptive boundary modeling. Outside, the rain came down hard, smearing the windows in gray streaks. The campus had long since gone quiet, the kind of hush that made every creak in the old building feel alive. He was about to pack up when his email pinged. Subject line, FYI, from admissions archive. The message was short. A colleague in the admissions office had flagged something odd during a database cleanup. Attached was a PDF, an old community college transcript from 4 years ago. The name, Nia Robinson. Ethan's brows furrowed. He opened the document and scanned quickly. Sparse coursework. A few general ed classes. Intro to Calculus I, A+. Calculus II, A+. And then, nothing. No withdrawal forms. No graduation. Just a void. But what caught Ethan's eye wasn't the grades. It was the notation scribbled by hand in the margins of her last math professor's evaluation. Unbelievable raw intuition. Shows signs of natural mathematical genius. But disappeared midway through semester. Never returned. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Disappeared. He suddenly realized just how little he knew about Nia outside of Jefferson Hall. Where she came from. Why she cleaned buildings instead of lecturing in them. The pieces didn't fit. Not yet. He closed his laptop, grabbed his coat, and headed out. Meanwhile, across campus, Nia sat in a quiet corner of a study space tucked between the engineering library and the dining hall. The janitor keycard she still carried gave her access long after students had gone home. She was alone. As she preferred it. A small stack of textbooks sat in front of her, but none of them were open. Instead, she scribbled furiously in her own notebook, half equations, half thoughts that danced between intuition and desperation. She was chasing something. It had started during today's seminar. Ethan had posed a hypothetical about nonlinear feedback systems in chaotic field environments. Most of the students had brushed it off as unsolvable without simulations. But Nia had felt something spark, a tiny whisper in the logic, a hidden pattern that wanted to be found. Now she was unraveling it line by line. As the clock crept past 1 a.m., her fingers were stained with ink, and her brain buzzed with static. But she kept going. The math wasn't just theory anymore, it was alive. She could feel the shape of it, like tracing the edges of a dream she almost understood. She didn't hear the footsteps until they were close. Nia. Ethan's voice was gentle, almost cautious. She turned around, startled. Her hand flew to her notebook like a reflex. But he wasn't there to take anything. His eyes were soft with curiosity. I didn't mean to sneak up, he said. Just, saw the light on. She looked at the empty room. Thought I'd have more time before someone noticed. He smiled. You tend to work best when no one's watching. She didn't answer, but her fingers tapped nervously against the page. Ethan stepped closer, slowly. What are you working on? She hesitated. The seminar problem. The chaotic feedback system. I think I see a loop condition no one's mapped yet. He raised an eyebrow. May I? She nodded, sliding her notebook across the table. He flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from intrigued to stunned. You've restructured the initial state matrix, he murmured. And, wait, you redefined the attractor fields using non-Euclidean geometry. I thought it made more sense that way, she said, almost defensively. The chaos curves don't align with flat space logic. He looked at her. It's not just the math. It's how you think. This is PhD-level modeling, Nia. I don't even have an associate's degree, she whispered. Silence stretched between them. Then Ethan said quietly, what happened? Why didn't you finish school? Nia stared down at her hands. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then. My mom got sick. Lupus. We couldn't afford help. I was the only one left to take care of her. Ethan sat down beside her. I took night shifts, cleaning offices, doing laundry, waiting tables. Math was the one thing I never let go of. I'd sneak into the library between shifts. Work on problems in the margins of junk mail. Solving equations felt like the only place I could breathe. She looked up at him then. But there was never enough time. Not for degrees. Not for papers. Just work. Ethan's throat tightened. The world had built walls around people like Nia, and then punished them for not climbing over fast enough. You kept learning, he said softly. Even when no one saw you. That's not failure. That's resilience. She gave a weak smile. Tell that to the admissions board. I intend to. She looked at him, surprised. Ethan took a deep breath. I want to make something clear. This isn't about charity. Or defying Harvard's rules just to make noise. This is about talent. And your talent isn't just rare, it's revolutionary. She stared at him, unsure what to say. Tomorrow, I want to introduce you to someone, he continued. Dr. Helena Marque. She's the head of an interdisciplinary research program at MIT. Her group is working on nonlinear dynamical systems. Your notes, this stuff you're chasing alone. They're bumping into the same questions. Nia's eyes widened. Wait. MIT? You'll meet as equals, he said. You belong in that room. Nia stood abruptly, overwhelmed. I'm not ready for that. I'm not polished. I don't know how to talk like those people. You don't need polish, Ethan said. You need a platform. He stood too, not closing the distance, but steady and sure. You've been fighting in the dark for years, Nia. Now it's time to bring your work into the light. She looked at the board behind her, her equations scrawled like a language only she could read. Then she looked back at him. And for the first time, she nodded. Not out of fear. But from the quiet, rising certainty that maybe, just maybe, her journey was finally beginning. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Nia Robinson had barely slept. She sat on the edge of her bed in her tiny apartment, clutching a cup of coffee gone cold hours ago. The silence of early morning wrapped around her like a blanket of doubt. On the table beside her were two notebooks, one frayed, filled with scribbled calculations and marginal questions, and one pristine, untouched, waiting for a new chapter to begin. Today was the meeting with Dr. Helena Marque. MIT. It sounded absurd even in her own mind. She tried to picture herself walking through those halls, sitting across from a world-class mathematician like an equal. Instead, all she could imagine was someone asking to see her student ID, and laughing when she couldn't produce one. Still, by 9:30 a.m., she was outside the glass-walled entrance to the institute. Ethan stood beside her, calm and professional in a slate-gray suit, holding a small leather folder. She wore the best clothes she had, clean, ironed, and carefully chosen, but she still felt underdressed, like a chess piece that had been dropped into the wrong game. You ready? He asked. No, she took a breath. But I'm here. That's more than most, he said with a small grin. Inside, everything gleamed. The building was silent in that scholarly way, where every sound felt like it had to justify itself. They took an elevator to the third floor, walked past framed awards and etched glass panels inscribed with equations. Outside a wooden door with Dr. Helena Marque, Systems Research, etched into a brass plaque, Ethan paused. She's brilliant, he said. But she doesn't care about titles. She only listens to the math. Nia nodded. She tried not to fidget. He knocked once and opened the door. Dr. Marque looked nothing like Nia expected. She was tall, with sharp Nordic features softened by round glasses and a long braid of silver hair. Her office was a controlled chaos of paper stacks, plant life, and a whiteboard bursting with incomplete theories. Ethan, she said, standing and shaking his hand. So this is your protégé. She's not my protégé, Ethan replied. She's the real deal. Dr. Marque turned to Nia and extended her hand. Nia Robinson, is it? Nia shook it. Yes, ma'am. Let's see what you've got. Just like that. No chit-chat. No discussion of degrees or resume. Ethan stepped back as Nia pulled out her battered notebook. She laid it on the table, flipped to the section from 2 nights ago, the looped chaotic system, the asymmetry thresholds, the attractor field redefinition. She explained as she went, careful but precise, her voice gaining strength with each step forward. Helena didn't interrupt. She paced, read, tilted her head. When Nia finished, she stood silently, waiting for judgment. Dr. Marque turned back to her slowly. This substitution here, did you develop it yourself? Yes. Have you run simulations? No. I don't have access to the software. Doesn't matter, Marque said quickly. The logic tracks. You constructed a recursive differential loop without even referencing the standard models. Nia blinked. I didn't know there were standard models. Helena smiled, and for a moment, it softened her entire face. That's even better. She turned to Ethan. You weren't exaggerating. This is natural intelligence, raw, intuitive. Rare. Very rare. Nia's heart thudded in her chest. I'd like to offer you a visiting scholar pass, Helena said. It's not enrollment, but it gives you access to the labs, to the library, and to join my research group for the semester. I'll personally sponsor it. Nia blinked, stunned. Just like that? Dr. Marque raised an eyebrow. You think the math lies? Nia let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. She was too stunned to speak. Ethan clapped her gently on the shoulder. Told you. But as with every bright moment in Nia's life, the light was followed closely by shadow. Word of her new role spread across the Harvard campus in less than 48 hours. And not everyone was applauding. Inside the faculty meeting room, voices were raised. You can't have it both ways, Dr. Langston said, slapping a printed article on the table. She's either a member of this academic institution or she isn't. She cannot be an employee and a scholar at the same time. It blurs ethical lines. She's not misrepresenting herself, Ethan replied. She's not using university resources under false pretenses. She's being mentored. Supported. She's attending graduate seminars without credentials. She's contributing to them. Langston crossed his arms. And now she's involved in interinstitutional research with MIT? Without a formal degree? This is not precedent, it's chaos. Dr. Murakami interjected. The question isn't whether she belongs by title. The question is whether she belongs by contribution. Langston snorted. Then let's talk contribution. Let's see a publication. Let's see peer-reviewed work. She'll get there, Ethan said firmly. But she can't do it while you're trying to strangle her before she starts. That night, Nia sat on the rooftop of her building with Marque, a bag of fries between them and the city buzzing below. He'd listened quietly as she told him everything, MIT, Dr. Marque, the strange pressure coming from Harvard. I don't get why they're so mad, he said. You're not taking anyone's place. They're mad because I didn't follow the rules. Whose rules? Marque asked, mouth full of fries. Nia chuckled. The ones written by people who look nothing like us. He looked at her. So what now? She stared out at the skyline. I go back. I keep working. I make it impossible for them to ignore me. A beat passed. Then Marque said, just promise me something. Yeah. When you get famous, don't forget the people who used to steal cafeteria sandwiches with you. She grinned. Deal. And somewhere deep inside her, a new truth settled. They could whisper. They could raise eyebrows. But they couldn't stop the work. And for the first time, she didn't just feel like she was solving equations. She felt like she was rewriting the formula of who gets to matter. The following weeks felt like a blur of equations, new faces, and a pressure unlike anything Nia had ever felt. She worked day and night, oscillating between her janitor shifts and her work with Dr. Marque's research team at MIT. The contrast was dizzying. By day, she scrubbed floors, quietly keeping to herself in the halls of Harvard. By night, she sat in Dr. Marque's office, scribbling complex systems and talking shop with PhDs and postdocs who spoke a language she only ever dreamed of understanding. Every meeting with Dr. Marque was both exhilarating and humbling. They discussed nonlinear dynamical systems and chaotic feedback models, topics that now felt like second nature to Nia. Her notebooks, once filled with scraps of abstract thoughts and half-formed equations, had transformed into sophisticated frameworks that even the brightest minds at MIT found compelling. But the more Nia advanced, the more she became aware of her own self-doubt, of the quiet voice in the back of her mind whispering that maybe she didn't belong here, maybe she wasn't meant to sit in this room. At night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, too restless to sleep, feeling the weight of it all. But there was one moment, one conversation, that would change everything. It was a Friday evening when Ethan Blake stopped by her apartment, carrying a bag of takeout food and an unusual air of seriousness. Nia had just finished cleaning the last hallway of the evening, still in her janitor's uniform, when she heard a knock at the door. "Are you coming to the dinner at MIT tonight?" Ethan asked, his voice soft. She frowned, wiping her hands on her jeans. "I wasn't planning to." "You should," he urged. "Helena's hosting a small dinner for some of the faculty and the research team. It's informal, just a chance to get to know each other." She hesitated, glancing at the pile of textbooks on the table. "I've got work to do. I can't keep up with their expectations if I'm just hanging out at dinner." Ethan smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "It's not about expectations. It's about showing them who you are outside of the work. You've already impressed them with your mind. Now let them see the person behind the equations." Nia opened the door wider, stepping aside to let him in. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." "You'll never be fully ready," he said gently, "but you're stronger than you think. Besides, they're not interested in perfection. They just want authenticity." She chewed her lip, still uncertain. Ethan handed her the bag of food, and she took it reluctantly. "Just 1 hour," he said. "That's all I'm asking." Nia thought about it for a moment and then nodded. She couldn't keep hiding. The only way to move forward was to keep stepping into the light, no matter how bright it was. The dinner at MIT was held in a modern, minimalist room on the top floor of one of the newer buildings. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the city, its lights flickering like fireflies in the night. There were about a dozen people, professors, researchers, and postdocs, all sitting around a large table, exchanging ideas and stories. The atmosphere was relaxed, but Nia felt out of place, like an imposter who hadn't earned her seat at the table. Ethan introduced her to Dr. Marque, who greeted her with a warm smile. "Nia, I'm glad you could join us," she said, her tone kind but businesslike. "I hope you're finding the work interesting." "It's a lot to take in," Nia replied, trying to sound confident. "But I'm learning a lot. Everyone here seems to know so much more than I do." "Everyone starts somewhere," Dr. Marque said, waving her hand dismissively. "You're doing fine. Better than fine, actually. You're already thinking beyond our current models." The conversation shifted, and Nia found herself listening more than speaking. She watched the others interact, fascinated by how easily they navigated complex topics, their words flowing like a seamless exchange of ideas. She had so much to learn, so many questions to ask. But when she opened her mouth to join in, her mind went blank. Ethan seemed to sense her discomfort. He leaned over and whispered, "It's okay. Just take a deep breath. No one here is trying to make you feel small. They respect you. You belong here." The words felt like a lifeline, but Nia was still unsure. The dinner went on, and she couldn't help but compare herself to everyone else, how effortlessly they spoke, how confident they were in their expertise. She realized that, despite her breakthroughs and the validation from Dr. Marque, she still felt like the outsider. The turning point came after the dinner. Most of the group had left, but Nia lingered in the room with Dr. Marque, Ethan, and a few of the younger postdocs who had stayed behind to help clean up. Dr. Marque was discussing an upcoming seminar, but Nia's mind kept drifting. Finally, one of the postdocs, a young woman named Sarah, turned to her. "So, Nia," Sarah said, "what got you into math in the first place?" Nia blinked, surprised by the question. "I guess, it's just always made sense to me. It was something I could control when everything else felt out of control." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I get that. A lot of us in this field end up in it because of that, seeking order when the world feels chaotic." The others were quiet for a moment, and then Ethan spoke. "What Nia's doing with this chaotic feedback system, it's groundbreaking. It's not just about the equations. It's about seeing something no one else has seen yet." Dr. Marque's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're working on something truly innovative, Nia. And I want you to know, when you're ready, I'll help you submit it for publication. But you'll have to be patient. The process can be long." Nia swallowed hard. "I'm ready. I think I'm ready." "Good," Dr. Marque said, her voice firm. "Because this isn't just about your academic career. It's about changing the way we look at these systems. You could be at the forefront of a revolution in mathematics. The road will be hard, but you can do it." In that moment, something inside Nia shifted. She wasn't just here to fill a space. She wasn't just trying to survive in a world that didn't seem to have room for her. She was here to make her mark, to be part of something larger than herself. The pressure was immense, but the potential was even greater. The next day, as Nia walked through Harvard's hallways once again, it didn't feel quite the same. The whispers, the skeptical looks, they still lingered, but they didn't weigh her down as much. She had a new sense of purpose now, and it was impossible to ignore. She was no longer just the janitor. She was Nia Robinson, mathematician in the making. And no one, no matter how much they tried to undermine her, could take that away. The days following that pivotal evening at MIT felt like a whirlwind. Nia's life, once confined to the routines of a janitor's shift and solitary nights with textbooks, was now a constant race between two worlds. By day, she was still cleaning floors at Harvard, scrubbing the same tiles, sweeping the same hallways, her movements mechanical, like she was stuck in the past. By night, she was immersed in cutting-edge research at MIT, collaborating with some of the brightest minds in mathematics. It was exhilarating and exhausting all at once. Her newfound recognition at MIT came with its own set of challenges. She wasn't just a visitor anymore. Dr. Marque had already introduced her to several faculty members, including a few prominent names in the world of chaotic systems. But as she sat through meetings, listening to brilliant conversations that once felt so out of reach, Nia couldn't shake the feeling that she was pretending to be someone she wasn't, an imposter. It was a small but persistent thought that clung to her like a shadow, following her through the corridors of both institutions. As much as Dr. Marque believed in her, as much as Ethan had her back, Nia felt like every piece of praise, every compliment, was one step closer to being discovered for the fraud she feared she was. But there was no turning back. Dr. Marque had made it clear that Nia's work was important, groundbreaking, even, but the pressure to keep up with the best minds in the field, to justify her place at the table, weighed on her. The more she learned, the more she realized just how far she had yet to go. She was surrounded by people with decades of experience, who had spent their whole lives in academia. Meanwhile, she was just a girl who had never finished high school, let alone stepped foot in a university lecture hall. The gap between them seemed insurmountable. Still, she pressed on, working tirelessly in the labs at MIT and attending late-night study sessions. But the world outside her work was starting to crumble. It all came to a head one afternoon as Nia finished her janitor's shift at Harvard. Her muscles ached from the constant movement, vacuuming, mopping, wiping. The smell of chemicals and the cold, sterile corridors felt oppressive, like a constant reminder of who she had been before all of this. As she finished her last sweep of the main hallway, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching from behind her. Turning around, she saw Dr. Langston, one of the senior faculty members at Harvard, striding down the hall with a determined look on his face. The last time Nia had seen him, he had been vocal about his doubts regarding her place in the research world. His disapproving gaze was something she couldn't easily forget. "Ms. Robinson," he called, stopping in front of her, his tone sharp but measured. Nia straightened up, unsure of what to expect. "Yes, Dr. Langston. I've heard some troubling things," he began, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. "You're being promoted to visiting scholar at MIT, but you're still working here, cleaning the very halls that our esteemed faculty walk through. That doesn't seem right." Nia felt the familiar sting of shame in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not looking for special treatment. I just want to work. You need to understand," Langston continued, his voice lowering, "there's a difference between getting a little recognition and being taken seriously in this field. And you're not going to get it by hiding in the shadows. You're being used. You think this MIT thing is your big break, but they'll never see you as an equal. They're just indulging you." The word struck her like a punch to the gut. It was exactly the fear she had been avoiding, that deep-seated belief that she didn't belong here, that it was all a mirage, something that would vanish the moment anyone truly looked closely. "Are you suggesting I should just stop?" Nia asked, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you the truth. You need to make a choice. Either you leave that," he spat out the word, "research group, or you come clean to everyone about what you really are." Her heart raced. This was it, the crossroads. She could stay and prove everyone wrong, fight for her place, or she could retreat back to the familiar, the comfortable. The janitor's cart. The floors she knew by heart. "You think I'm not capable," Nia said quietly, her fists clenching. "I think you're wasting your time," Langston replied. "I'm trying to help you see that." Nia stood in silence, trying to keep her composure. She could feel the hot sting of frustration rising in her chest. Everything she had worked for, everything she had fought to get to, felt like it was crumbling in an instant. But then she remembered Dr. Marque's words about the importance of believing in her own work. The moment of silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. And then, with newfound clarity, Nia lifted her chin and spoke. "I'll do it my way. I don't need anyone's permission." Dr. Langston's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," she said, her voice steady. "But I won't regret staying true to myself." Langston scoffed and walked away, leaving Nia standing in the hallway, the weight of his words still heavy in the air. Nia barely slept that night. She tossed and turned in bed, the conflict with Langston echoing in her mind. He wasn't wrong, she was caught in a struggle between two worlds. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that the only way forward was to embrace the discomfort. She had spent too much of her life trying to fit into a mold that wasn't made for her. She wasn't a janitor trying to be a scholar. She was a scholar, period. And no one, not even someone like Langston, could take that away from her. The next morning, Nia made a decision. She walked into Dr. Marque's office, the anxiety that had gripped her in the past few days gone. She was ready to take the next step. "Dr. Marque," she began, her voice firm. "I'm ready to submit my work. To get published." Dr. Marque looked up from her desk, surprise flickering across her face. "Are you sure?" "I am," Nia said, meeting her gaze with confidence. "I'm ready." Helena smiled, a glint of pride in her eyes. "Good. Because the world is about to see what you're capable of." In that moment, Nia realized that she had crossed the threshold. There was no going back now. She was no longer the girl hiding in the shadows. She was a force to be reckoned with. And no matter what anyone said, she would prove them all wrong. The printed manuscript sat in the center of the table like a bomb waiting to go off. It had taken Nia 3 weeks of backbreaking effort to complete her draft. 3 weeks of juggling janitorial shifts, late nights at the lab, and relentless self-doubt. 3 weeks of digging into the math until her head throbbed, second-guessing every line of logic, every symbol, every leap. And now, it was done. Chaotic feedback stabilization in nonlinear systems, an intuitive alternative to Lyapunov control. Her name was typed in bold beneath the title, Nia R. Robinson. She stared at it in silence, hardly believing it was real. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the old analog clock on Dr. Marque's office wall. Papers rustled. Outside the window, gray light filtered through the leaves, casting fractured shadows on the whiteboard covered in equations. Helena leaned back in her chair, slowly flipping through the pages. Ethan sat beside Nia, saying nothing, letting the tension bloom like smoke in a closed room. Finally, Helena set the stack of papers down and looked up. "This is not what I expected," she said, her voice unreadable. Nia's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "I mean it's more ambitious than I thought it would be," she said. "You've proposed a completely new framework for interpreting dynamic convergence. It's bold. And it's going to make some people very uncomfortable." Nia blinked. "Is that a good thing?" Helena smiled faintly. "If your goal is to change the way we understand chaotic systems, then yes. It's a very good thing. But it's going to cause noise." Ethan nodded. "This will challenge legacy work. Some of the faculty will push back, hard." Nia looked between them. "But it holds up, right? The logic works." "Yes," Helena said. "It does. It's unconventional, but the math is solid. Still, publishing this under your name alone will trigger a storm. There will be questions. About your background. About how you got here. People don't like being outdone by someone who never even set foot in their ivory towers. Let them be uncomfortable," Nia said quietly, her eyes fierce. "I didn't write this to make anyone feel safe." Helena leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "Then I'll help you submit it. But I want you to be ready for what comes next. Once it's out there, they'll come for you. Not because of the math, but because you're the one who wrote it." Within a week, Helena submitted the paper to the Journal of Applied Nonlinear Dynamics. It was fast-tracked, thanks to Helena's reputation, but still subject to review. The waiting began. At first, Nia tried to stay busy. She buried herself in new research, cleaned classrooms with extra care, avoided eye contact with Harvard faculty who still treated her like a curiosity. Malik dropped by most nights with food or dumb jokes to cheer her up, and Ethan checked in regularly, even when his own work threatened to drown him. But the whispers started quickly. "Did you hear about the janitor who thinks she's a genius? She's not even enrolled here. She's just Marque's charity case." Nia overheard them in stairwells, in cafeterias, even in the locker room where she kept her mop and gloves. The word stung, but what hit harder was the growing tension in the air, like everyone was waiting for her to fail. She knew what they wanted, for her to retreat. To crumble. But she wouldn't. Still, it wasn't until one afternoon in late November that the true storm hit. She was walking through Harvard Yard when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Dr. Marque. "Come to my office now. Urgent." Her heart raced. She didn't even bother to change out of her cleaning uniform. She jogged across campus, barely noticing the wind cutting through her thin jacket. When she arrived, Helena handed her a printed copy of a blog post that had gone viral in the academic community. The title read, "Imposter at MIT, the case of a janitor turned mathematician." Nia's stomach dropped. The piece was written anonymously but was dripping with venom. It accused her of academic fraud, of exploiting institutional kindness, of pretending to be something she wasn't. It questioned the validity of her work, her motives, even her relationship with Ethan, insinuating favoritism, manipulation. "They're coming for you," Helena said softly. "I won't lie. This could affect your submission. If the reviewers are swayed by this noise." "They won't be," Ethan said from the corner of the room, his voice tight with fury. "Anyone who knows math will see the truth." "But people don't read for truth," Helena countered. "They read for blood." Nia stood frozen. The paper in her hands felt heavier than lead. This wasn't just academic pushback anymore. This was character assassination. "What do I do?" she whispered. Ethan stood. "We fight back. We don't let them control the story." Helena nodded. "We go public. I'll issue a statement supporting the integrity of your work. But more importantly, you need to speak." Nia looked at them, suddenly breathless. "Speak? Like, a public statement?" "A seminar," Helena said. "A live presentation. One you lead. No safety net. No edits. You walk into a room full of skeptics and make them believe." Nia's mind spun. Public speaking? To a hostile crowd? "I'm not ready," she said. "Yes, you are," Helena said firmly. "Because this isn't just about defending your work. It's about claiming your space." Ethan added, "They can't erase you if you're the one holding the chalk." The seminar was scheduled for 2 weeks later. The flyers went out under the title, "Redefining Chaos, a New Approach" by Nia R. Robinson. Sponsored by the MIT Applied Mathematics Department. The room filled fast. Professors from Harvard, MIT, and even Yale showed up. Grad students packed the aisles. Reporters loitered in the back. Langston sat in the front row, arms crossed. Nia stood behind the podium, her notebook in hand, wearing the only blazer she owned, her palms damp, her heart racing. She looked out at the sea of faces, many of them skeptical, some outright hostile. She took a breath. Then another. And she began. "Most of what we know about chaos, we inherited," she said. "We assume it must look like what's already been published. But what if the models we're using are only showing us part of the picture?" She moved to the board and began writing. As her marker scratched across the surface, the room quieted. Eyes followed her logic. The curves, the loops, the delicate symmetry of systems teetering on the edge of collapse, and how her model gently pulled them back. She spoke for 40 minutes, uninterrupted. And when she finished, there was silence. Then someone, one of the grad students, stood and began to clap. And another. And another. Within seconds, the room erupted. Nia stood frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief. In the front row, Dr. Langston didn't clap. But he didn't leave either. Later that night, Nia sat on a bench outside the building, her hands still trembling. Ethan joined her, handing her a hot drink. "You did it," he said. "I think I blacked out halfway through." He laughed. "It was brilliant. They saw it. They saw you." She nodded slowly. "Then let them talk. Let them whisper." He looked at her. "You've rewritten the rules." "No," Nia said, staring up at the stars. "I just reminded them that greatness doesn't always come in the package they expect." The morning after the seminar, Nia woke up to a buzzing phone and a storm of emails. She rubbed the sleep from her eyes, sat up in bed, and stared at the screen in disbelief. Her inbox was overflowing, subject lines reading like headlines. Innovator from the shadows, janitor turned mathematician redefines chaos, genius hiding in plain sight. Overnight, Nia Robinson had gone from anonymous to unavoidable. The clip of her seminar had been uploaded to MIT's official YouTube channel. It had gone viral, hundreds of thousands of views in under 12 hours. People from all walks of life were sharing it, mathematicians, educators, former high school dropouts, single mothers, even celebrities and public figures commenting on her unorthodox brilliance and revolutionary clarity. She scrolled through messages from people she'd never met, some congratulating her, others pouring their hearts out about how her story made them believe in second chances. One message stopped her cold. It was from a woman named Veronica who worked nights cleaning offices in Atlanta. She wrote, "I cried watching your seminar. I mopped floors, too. I always felt like I missed my chance to be something more. But last night, I saw myself in you. Thank you for not hiding. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost." Nia stared at the screen, heart pounding. This was bigger than she'd ever imagined. But with the spotlight came a deeper tension. The very same day, Dr. Marque called a closed-door meeting in her office. "I need you to know something, Nia," she said, serious. "There are people in the academic community who don't like what's happening. They feel like your success threatens the integrity of the traditional path, 4-year degrees, PhDs, tenure. You didn't play by their rules. And people don't like when the rules change." Nia folded her arms, feeling the air go tight. "I never asked to be famous." "You didn't," Helena agreed. "But fame found you anyway." Ethan, seated across from her, added, "There are already murmurs about the journal. Some reviewers feel you lacked appropriate supervision, and others think your background disqualifies you from lead authorship." Nia bristled. "So even if I wrote the damn thing, they want someone else's name in front?" "That's academia," Helena said flatly. "But I didn't bring you here to get stepped on." She stood and handed Nia a new document, a formal invitation from the Clay Mathematics Institute. A think tank panel. "All expenses paid. They want you to speak," Helena said. "Not just about the model, but about your journey. It's a big stage." Nia stared at the invitation. Her name, printed in crisp font, looked alien. "They want a story," she muttered. "They want that Janitor Prodigy headline." "Yes," Helena said, "but they'll also hear the math. And once they do, the story won't matter nearly as much as the truth." Nia accepted the invitation. A week later, she flew to New York for the summit, a gathering of brilliant minds, all of them credentialed, pedigreed, and well-established. As she walked into the marble atrium of the institute, wearing the one tailored suit Helena had bought her, she felt again that lingering shadow of imposter syndrome crawling back. But she straightened her back, lifted her chin, and told herself the truth. "You've done the work. You've earned this." The panel discussion was moderated by a man from Princeton, and the table included 3 distinguished professors, all in their 60s, all male. Nia was the only woman. The only black person. The only one without a formal degree. And yet, her voice commanded the room. She spoke about chaotic systems, but she wove it into a larger truth, how chaos isn't just a mathematical concept, it's life. It's waking up at 4 a.m. to clean toilets and then spending your breaks solving equations in the supply closet. It's growing up with nothing and building something out of it anyway. The room was silent as she spoke. And when she finished, even the moderator looked momentarily speechless. Then came the questions. Some were curious. Others were sharp-edged. "Do you think bypassing the academic system sets a dangerous precedent? Are you suggesting lived experience is equivalent to formal training? Would you call this model revolutionary, or simply intuitive?" She answered calmly. Truthfully. Without apology. "I'm not suggesting we tear down the system," she said. "I'm suggesting we open a side door. Because sometimes, the best minds are stuck outside, sweeping the steps." After the panel, as she exited the building, a man approached her. He was in his late 50s, wearing an old tweed jacket and wire-rimmed glasses. She recognized him instantly, Dr. Harvey Brennan, author of Control Theory and Chaos, A Systems Perspective. His textbook had been one of the first she ever read. I'll admit, he said, extending a hand, I was skeptical. Nia shook it, cautiously. But your method, your refinement of adaptive convergence, I haven't seen anyone attempt it with such elegance. It's irritating, honestly. She raised an eyebrow. Irritating? He grinned. That I didn't think of it first. She laughed, relief flooding her like sunlight. You forced the field to look inward, he continued. And that's something most of us avoid. Don't stop. They'll try to contain you. Don't let them. It was the kindest thing he could have said. When she returned to Cambridge that weekend, the energy felt different. The whispers had faded. Some of the professors who once ignored her now offered polite nods in passing. Others avoided eye contact altogether. But Marque was waiting outside her apartment building, holding 2 coffees and grinning like an idiot. You're a damn celebrity now, he said, handing her one of the cups. She smiled. Feels weird. You good, though? She looked out over the Harvard skyline, deep in thought. I don't know yet. Everything's happening so fast. Marque nodded. Well, fast's better than nothing. She glanced down at her phone, where a new message had popped up, from the editor of the Journal of Applied Nonlinear Dynamics. Subject. Accepted for publication. Congratulations, Nia. You changed the game. She gasped. Marque blinked. What? What happened? She turned the screen toward him. He stared. You did it. Nia felt tears sting her eyes. She didn't blink them back. No, she whispered. We did it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Nia never thought that success could feel this lonely. The email from the journal had been the culmination of everything she'd worked for, her theories validated, her name etched into the annals of academic literature. But after the first wave of celebration, after Marque's hug, after the texts from Ethan and Helena and even a few cautious congratulations from professors who used to ignore her, there came silence. Not the kind of silence that felt peaceful. The kind that made her feel like she was floating in a void. The paper was out. The storm had passed. And yet, she felt more adrift than ever. For the first time in months, there were no equations screaming for her attention. No seminars to prepare. No looming deadlines or panels. And with that stillness came something she hadn't allowed herself to feel until now, grief. It hit her in the quietest moment, on a Thursday evening, when she came home to her small, dimly lit apartment and found her mom's old photo fallen from the wall. She picked it up carefully. Her mother's eyes, so familiar and warm, stared back from the worn edges of the picture. Nia sat down on the floor, holding it to her chest, and cried, hard. For all the versions of herself that had been left behind in pursuit of this dream. For the girl who used to curl up on the laundromat bench with a wrinkled library book. For the woman who had walked through Harvard's halls with a mop in one hand and a head full of theorems no one cared to hear. She thought of the sacrifices, the birthdays she missed, the nights she hadn't eaten just to buy another textbook from a used store, the jobs she worked while others studied full-time. She thought of Marque sleeping on the couch while she scribbled formulas on the back of junk mail. She thought of her mom, gone before she ever got to say, "Look, Ma. I made it." And she realized, success didn't fill every crack. It just gave her the space to finally feel how deep they were. The next few days passed in a strange haze. MIT had officially invited her to apply for a full-time research fellowship, a groundbreaking move. The position wasn't just honorary. It came with funding, responsibilities, a place among faculty. But Nia hesitated. She hadn't told anyone yet, not even Ethan. Instead, she returned to Harvard's halls and resumed her janitorial shift, mop in hand, gloves on, music in her ears. The smell of lemon disinfectant and old linoleum was oddly comforting. Here, no one asked her to speak on panels or defend her work. Here, no one expected her to carry the torch for every underdog who ever dreamed beyond their means. She was invisible again. And for a brief moment, she needed that. But invisibility, she learned, came with a price. It was on her third night back that she overheard two professors talking in the staff lounge. She had just emptied the trash bins and paused near the door. "I mean, the math is interesting," one said, "but it's a PR stunt. A janitor who writes a paper. Please. The media loves a fairy tale." The other laughed. "It's performative diversity, Harold. She's a symbol. They'll squeeze her dry and move on." Nia felt the blood drain from her face. She backed away before they saw her and slipped out the side door into the night. Her steps echoed in the cold silence of the campus, her breath fogging in the November air. It didn't matter that her work had been peer-reviewed, or that she'd outperformed scholars with doctorates. To some people, she would always be the janitor with a brain. Never just the mathematician. And the worst part? A small, gnawing part of her agreed with them. Later that night, she sat in a diner with Ethan, staring into a cup of black coffee she hadn't touched. She finally told him about the MIT offer, and about the voices she couldn't get out of her head. "I thought it would feel like winning," she said, barely above a whisper. "But it just feels like surviving in a bigger arena. Like I traded one battlefield for another." Ethan frowned. "You're allowed to feel that. This is heavy, Nia. People are putting expectations on you that no one person should carry." "They don't see me," she said. "They see a narrative. But you know who you are." She looked up at him, her eyes rimmed with fatigue. "Do I? I've spent so long trying to prove I'm more than what I came from. But I don't know if I even know what I want anymore." Ethan reached across the table and gently placed his hand over hers. "Then let's figure it out. But don't let them decide for you." She squeezed his hand back, not speaking. The coffee cooled between them. The next morning, she went to Helena's office. The sun had just broken through the clouds, casting light through the old windows. "I'm thinking of turning it down," Nia said as she stepped inside. Helena looked up, startled. "MIT? I don't know if I'm ready." Helena studied her for a long moment. "You're not ready to accept their recognition. Or are you not ready to accept your own?" That stopped Nia cold. "I've been fighting for so long," she said, voice breaking. "Fighting to get in. Fighting to be taken seriously. I don't know how to just be." Helena stood, walked to her, and placed both hands on her shoulders. "You were never supposed to just be," she said. "You're here to disrupt. To rewrite. To shake the ground others think is solid. That kind of change doesn't feel safe." "I'm tired," Nia whispered. Helena nodded. "Then rest. But don't retreat. You earned your seat. And I promise you, there are students watching you right now, kids in forgotten neighborhoods, who need to see that someone who looks like them, who came from where they came from, got in the room and stayed." Nia closed her eyes. Let the words soak into the parts of her still fractured by doubt. Maybe success wasn't peace. Maybe it was pressure and noise and conflict and visibility when all you wanted was quiet. But maybe it was also power. Not just to open the door, but to hold it open for the next one through. And maybe that was enough reason to keep going. The MIT fellowship offer still sat unread in her inbox when Nia walked back into Helena's office, a week after their last conversation. This time, she didn't hesitate. "I'm taking it," she said. "The fellowship. I'm not running anymore." Helena smiled slowly, the pride in her eyes quiet and deep. "Then it's time we started talking about what comes next." What came next wasn't just a new job title or a seat at a different table. It was a shift in identity. Nia Robinson, once the silent figure behind a mop bucket, was now a research fellow in applied mathematics at MIT. The announcement was formal, featured on the university homepage with a photo of her standing on the steps of the mathematics building. No mop in sight, just her, notebook in hand, eyes locked on the horizon. But not everyone celebrated. Some accused MIT of grandstanding. Others said she hadn't paid her dues. That she hadn't earned her stripes the traditional way. The whispers returned. So did the veiled skepticism. But this time, Nia had changed. This time, she didn't shrink from the noise. She answered with action. Her first initiative as a fellow wasn't about equations. It was about people. She called it the Side Door Program. A small, experimental initiative within MIT's math department designed to offer research mentorships to overlooked talents, high school dropouts, community college students, GED graduates, anyone who showed raw potential but lacked access. Nia designed the curriculum herself. Not just in theory but in spirit. It wasn't about gatekeeping knowledge, it was about unlocking it. Genius doesn't only live where we expect it, she said during the program's launch event. It lives in subway stations. In late-night diners. In homes where the lights are turned off when the bills are too high. We've confused polish with potential for too long. This program is a correction. The proposal was bold, even radical by MIT standards. But the institution, perhaps swept up in the PR glow of her viral rise, approved the pilot year. They gave her a tiny office, a modest stipend, and a classroom that had once been used as storage. It was more than enough. The first semester of the Side Door program attracted dozens of applicants, from underprivileged students in Boston to autodidacts in rural Maine. The selection process was unorthodox. Instead of GPA or SAT scores, Nia asked for math journals, problem-solving videos, handwritten letters describing their hunger to learn. 10 students were chosen. One of them was a 17-year-old from Roxbury named Elijah, who worked part-time at a grocery store and taught himself differential equations on a borrowed tablet. Another was Camila, a former waitress and mother of 2 who solved systems of nonlinear equations in the margins of receipts. Nia met them all on the first day, standing at the front of that dusty, underlit room, feeling something she hadn't felt in years, belonging. This isn't a charity, she told them. This is a lab. You're not here because someone felt sorry for you. You're here because you've got the math in your bones. Let's make noise. They did. They tackled advanced topics most first-year grad students hadn't seen. They fumbled, they argued, they stayed after hours. Some cried. Some almost quit. But Nia was there every step of the way, coaching them not just through proofs, but through life, through fear, exhaustion, imposter syndrome, the same demons she'd once fought. Ethan volunteered as a guest lecturer. Helena offered additional resources. Even Malik stepped in once to talk about mental endurance, how to survive when your dream seemed bigger than your circumstance. The room began to fill with something powerful. Hope. Earned, not gifted. But success, again, invited scrutiny. At a faculty roundtable, a senior professor questioned the legitimacy of the program. "What metrics are you using?" he asked. "How do we ensure academic integrity?" Nia met his gaze evenly. "We measure progress by growth, not pedigree." He scoffed. "It's not enough to be motivated. Mathematics is rigorous. It demands structure. And structure," she replied, "can be built. But passion? That's rare. I'll take a student who solves problems in the break room over someone coasting on a resume any day." Her words sparked both applause and silence. It was a battle she was now used to fighting. But unlike before, she wasn't standing alone. Halfway through the semester, Nia got a letter. Not an email. A real letter, folded carefully and mailed in a simple white envelope. It was from Langston. She stared at it for hours before opening it. "Nia. I won't pretend I supported you from the beginning. I didn't. I mistook your brilliance for disruption, and I saw your background as a threat to the institution I've spent my life inside. But I watched your seminar. I read your paper twice. And I've seen what you're building with the side door. I was wrong. Thank you for proving me wrong. H. Langston. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her notebook. Sometimes redemption didn't come with fanfare. Just honesty. On the final day of the semester, her students gathered for what was supposed to be a casual farewell. Instead, they turned it into a celebration: cupcakes, a whiteboard filled with inside jokes and formulas, and a thank you card so full of handwriting it spilled onto the back. One by one, they shared what the program meant to them. I thought I was invisible, Elijah said. This made me feel seen. Camila, wiping away tears, said, no one ever told me I was smart before. You changed my whole life. Nia stood silently, emotion swelling in her throat. Then someone handed her a small box. Inside was a piece of polished wood, engraved with words that nearly broke her. For the one who built a door where none existed. She didn't cry until she got home. And when she did, she cried not from exhaustion, or fear, or pain, but from gratitude. From finally understanding that she hadn't just rewritten equations. She'd rewritten expectation. And that kind of math. That was the most powerful of all. The winter snow came down in thick, wet sheets, blanketing Cambridge in silence. Outside the glass walls of MIT's mathematics building, the world looked peaceful, still. But inside, tension rippled through the halls like electricity before a storm. Nia sat across from Dr. Everett Mole, the head of the Institute's Research Oversight Committee. His office was pristine, leather-bound journals lined the walls, a globe in the corner, the faint scent of old paper and eucalyptus polish in the air. He folded his hands, leaned forward, and said, Nia, there's been a formal complaint. She blinked, taken off guard. A complaint? Regarding the side door program. Academic integrity. Admissions bypass. Favoritism. They're calling it unregulated and risky. Nia felt her stomach drop. Who filed it? He hesitated, then slid a folder across the desk. She opened it. Her breath caught. At the top, anonymous report. Inside, quotes. Out-of-context recordings. A screenshot of a student's unsanctioned access to lab equipment. Notes suggesting Nia had blurred the line between mentorship and favoritism. It was all twisted. Fragments of truth strung together to make a lie. They're launching a review, Mole said carefully. Nothing has been decided. But I suggest you suspend the program until the process is complete. Suspend it? She asked, voice tight. For what? Trying to give people a chance. He leaned back, sighing. I believe in your work, Nia. But not everyone does. And right now, you've become polarizing. That word again. Polarizing. It followed her like a ghost. Every time she made a move, someone called it too bold, too untraditional, too much. She left the office with the folder pressed against her chest, fury bubbling under her ribs. Ethan met her at a coffee shop 2 hours later. She dropped the folder in front of him. They're trying to shut it down, she said. After everything. He read through it silently, jaw clenched. This is ridiculous. Someone's trying to smear it. Maybe Langston has friends in high places. Or maybe it's just the system fighting back. They're afraid, Ethan said simply. Because you didn't ask for permission. And now my students might pay the price. That was the part that hurt the most. Camila had just been accepted into a graduate bridge program, because of her work in the side door. Elijah had finally begun to believe he belonged in a place like this. And now it could all come crashing down because someone behind a locked door thought Nia had stepped too far out of her lane. She had fought so hard to be heard. Now they were trying to silence her through bureaucracy. "I can't just shut it down," she whispered. Ethan leaned forward. "Then don't." But defiance had consequences. Within days, an official inquiry was opened. Emails arrived, some supportive, some cold. Her lab access was temporarily paused. Her name was removed from an internal committee roster without notice. The institutional frost was subtle, but real. Even Helena couldn't stop it entirely. "They want you quiet for now," she said behind closed doors. "They're trying to see if you'll fold." Nia looked her in the eye. "I won't." Helena smiled sadly. "I know." Outside of MIT, the media caught wind of the controversy. A blogger picked it up. Then a reporter. Headlines twisted the truth. Viral math prodigy under fire for program ethics. MIT's side door under scrutiny, revolution or risk. She received hate mail. Accusations of fraud. Trolls flooded her social media. She'd been uplifted as a symbol, and now they were tearing her down with the same speed and hunger. But amid the wreckage, hope flickered. Messages poured in from former students, from single mothers, from aspiring mathematicians in places like Detroit, Oakland, and Jackson, Mississippi. They wrote, "Don't let them scare you. You're changing the world. If the door closes, we'll build a new one with you." And something inside Nia hardened, not into bitterness, but into resolve. She didn't retreat. Instead, she called a press conference. It wasn't hosted by MIT or some polished sponsor. It was in a rented community hall down the street from a Boston train stop. Folding chairs, a cracked podium, a whiteboard behind her. But it was packed. Former students. Educators. Community leaders. People who had seen the impact firsthand. Helena stood in the back. Marque sat front row. Ethan held a camera. Nia stepped up to the mic. "I've been called many things since this started," she said. "A janitor. A fluke. A threat. A risk." She paused, let the silence settle. "But I am a mathematician. I am a teacher. And I am someone who knows what it means to be locked out." Applause rose like thunder. She continued. "The side door wasn't a loophole. It was a lifeline. And no institution should be afraid of potential, especially when it comes from places they don't usually look." Then she picked up a marker and began working through one of the models developed by her students. Live. On the board. The room watched in awe as she explained not just the math, but the humanity behind it. "This," she said, tapping the equation, "wasn't born in a lecture hall. It was born in a grocery store stockroom. On the night shift. Because brilliance isn't confined by tradition." When she stepped away, the crowd erupted. Later that night, the clip went viral again. But this time, it wasn't about being discovered. It was about taking back the narrative. Within a week, MIT's tone shifted. The review continued, but under public pressure, the suspension was lifted. The side door program resumed with oversight, but also with a new advisory board. And Nia was invited to sit on the board of admissions for unconventional applicants. It wasn't a perfect victory. But it was a step. Nia sat in her apartment, reading a letter from Camila, who'd just received a scholarship to Columbia. In it, she'd written, "You believed in me before I did. I'm going to carry that belief into every room I enter now. Thank you, Professor Robinson." Nia smiled. The title still felt strange on her ears. But it was real. And she'd earned it, not by playing the game, but by refusing to let others define the rules. The train rocked gently beneath her as it cut through the Connecticut countryside, winter trees blurring into a dark gray sea. Nia sat alone in a quiet car, laptop closed, phone off, forehead resting against the cool glass. It was the first time in weeks that she'd allowed herself to be still. She was on her way to speak at a public school district in Bridgeport, invited not by a university or media outlet, but by a high school teacher named Mrs. Rodriguez who had stumbled on the side door program through a viral tweet and showed it to her AP math students. In her message, Mrs. Rodriguez had written, "They don't believe they belong in rooms like MIT. Maybe hearing from you will help them believe otherwise." It wasn't an invitation Nia could ignore. When she stepped into the gymnasium that afternoon, it was packed wall to wall with students, some sitting cross-legged on the hardwood floor, others in folding chairs arranged in jagged rows. The walls were lined with faded banners. Class of 2015, Regional Science Fair Champions, and Home of the Tigers. Nia wore no blazer, no heels, no title pinned to her chest, just sneakers, jeans, and a warm navy sweater. She walked onto the stage like she was walking into a friend's living room. "I'm not here to impress you," she said into the mic, "I'm here because someone told me you think you don't belong in the places where decisions are made. That you think math isn't for you. That intelligence looks like someone else." A few students sat up straighter. Some leaned forward. "Well, let me tell you something, the smartest person I ever met wasn't a professor. She was a janitor at Harvard who cleaned classrooms all night and wrote formulas on napkins between trash runs. She didn't have fancy degrees. But she had questions. She had curiosity. She had fire." A girl in the third row raised her hand. "That was you, right?" Nia smiled. "That was me." And for the next hour, she told them everything, not just the shiny version, but the whole truth. The loneliness, the fear, the doors slammed in her face, the men who dismissed her ideas, the nights she went to sleep hungry, the professors who looked through her like she was air. But she also told them about the joy, about discovering something new in a string of numbers, about building a program from nothing, about watching her students rise like stars. "Math doesn't care where you come from," she said. "It only cares that you ask the right questions. That you keep asking them, even when the answers are far away." When she finished, they stood. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Some clapped. Some cried. One boy whispered, "She's like us." And for the first time, Nia believed that was true, not just for her, but for all of them. On the train ride back, she opened her laptop and began sketching out a new vision. The side door program had been just the beginning. A pilot. A proof of concept. What if it became something more? Not just a classroom. Not just MIT. What if they built a national network? She imagined community labs in underserved cities. Online modules for students in rural towns with no advanced math classes. Mentorship circles, funded scholarships, a curriculum designed for hungry minds, not polished resumes. She wrote for hours. Ideas poured out like they had in the early days, when equations had been her only language. But now, she thought in systems. In scale. In people. She wasn't solving math problems anymore. She was solving access. Back in Cambridge, the climate around her had changed. Professors who once ignored her now stopped her in the hallway. She was invited to panels, not just to sit, but to moderate. One senior faculty member even asked her advice on how to design a more inclusive curriculum. But Nia wasn't interested in prestige anymore. She was interested in impact. She spent less time in meetings and more time in classrooms. She visited local high schools, spoke at community colleges, held open forums online for anyone, anywhere. Who wanted to talk math, life, or both. And slowly, something began to shift. Not just at MIT, but beyond. Other institutions reached out. UC Berkeley. Georgia Tech. Even Stanford. They wanted to replicate the side door model. She agreed, on one condition. It can't just be a feel-good story, she told them. It has to be sustainable. It has to be permanent. This isn't PR. It's a pipeline. They listened. Not all of them eagerly, but they listened. Because Nia wasn't asking for space anymore. She was building it. Late one night, she returned home and found a letter waiting in her mailbox. There was no return address. Just her name in careful handwriting. Inside was a folded piece of paper, old and worn at the edges. She unfolded it slowly. It was from her mother. One she'd written when Nia was 16 and angry at the world, ready to give up on school, convinced no one would ever take her seriously. Her mom had slipped it into a library book, hoping Nia would find it later. Somehow, she had never seen it. But now, here it was. Baby girl. I know this world is heavy. And I know you're carrying more than your share. But you are not just surviving. You are becoming. I don't need anyone to tell me how brilliant you are, I see it every time you look at a problem like it's a puzzle waiting to be unlocked. Don't let anyone dim that. You come from women who built homes out of nothing and turned scraps into meals. You are the answer to prayers we didn't know how to say. Keep going. Love, Mama. Nia sank to the floor, let her clutch to her chest, and let the tears fall. Not from grief. Not from pain. But from the quiet, fierce joy of knowing that everything, every step, every bruise, every closed door, had led her here. To a life bigger than she ever imagined. To a new equation. And this time, she wasn't solving it alone. It started with a single email from a young woman named Fatima in Baltimore. Dear Professor Robinson, I watched your side door talk on YouTube. I'm a first-gen college student majoring in accounting. I've always loved numbers, but I never felt like I belonged in real math. But the way you spoke. You made it sound like there's room for people like me. I want to learn more. Can you help? Nia stared at the screen for a long time. She replied the same night. Yes. Let's find the door together. That one message turned into 20. Then 100. Then thousands. From young men in rural Texas who had never met a black mathematician. To single moms studying at night after putting kids to bed. To war veterans seeking purpose through logic and learning. To a 72-year-old retiree who had just discovered calculus on YouTube and fallen in love with it. They weren't asking for handouts. They were asking for a map. And Nia was determined to draw it. By spring, the side door had grown into something no one, especially not MIT, could ignore. With Ethan and Helena's help, Nia spun the program into a nonprofit. It was renamed Open Access, and its mission was loud and clear, to make advanced mathematical education accessible, inclusive, and community-powered. Its symbol. A circle interrupted by an open segment, unfinished, like every learning journey. Nia was its first executive director. She turned down 3 academic offers to make it her full-time work. Universities educate, she said during the launch. But movements liberate. Open Access partnered with tech companies, community colleges, and local educators. It launched satellite chapters in Detroit, Atlanta, and the Bronx. Each had its own flavor, its own rhythm, but all followed the same principle: math belongs to everyone. Nia made sure her original 10 side door students became the first chapter mentors. Camila hosted live tutorials on YouTube. Elijah became a guest lecturer at community events. Their stories, once exceptions, were becoming templates. The fire was spreading. But the higher the flame, the longer the shadows. As the movement grew, so did the opposition. One academic journal ran a critique titled, "The Democratization of Genius, a Cautionary Tale." It argued that loosening the gates around elite STEM fields risked diluting rigor and confusing inspiration with qualification. Nia didn't respond with words. She responded with a paper, co-authored by her former students, published in the Journal of Applied Mathematics, on a novel approach to modeling multivariable optimization in chaotic systems. It stunned the academic community. Because the math wasn't just solid, it was elegant. Bold. Clean. Beautiful. And it had come from the very minds the system once tried to overlook. The backlash turned into debate. The debate turned into change. Institutions began to adjust their outreach models. Admissions boards started reviewing more holistic applications. A few Ivy League schools created pilot programs modeled after open access. And through it all, Nia kept working. She traveled constantly, speaking at prisons, tribal colleges, public high schools. She sat with students who thought they were stupid because they couldn't pass time tests, and showed them that intelligence had more than one tempo. She cried in church basements. Laughed in gymnasiums. Solved proofs on cafe napkins with kids who didn't yet know they were brilliant. She wasn't becoming a leader. She already was one. Then came the White House. She was invited to Washington for a STEM equity summit. It was supposed to be a panel, but when she arrived, she learned something else. "You've been selected to receive the National Medal of Science," the staffer said, almost casually, like it wasn't the highest honor in the country for scientific contribution. Nia blinked. "What?" "It's real," Helena confirmed later over the phone, voice thick with pride. "You're being recognized. For everything." But Nia hesitated. "I don't want it to be about me," she said. "This movement, it's bigger than one person." Helena's answer was simple, "Then we're the medal for all of them." The ceremony took place on a warm May afternoon, under a sky so blue it looked almost painted. Nia stood on the south lawn, flanked by her students, her mentors, her friends. Her hair was braided back, her eyes clear. When they called her name, she stepped forward not with awe, but with intention. The medal was placed around her neck. The crowd stood. In that moment, she didn't see cameras. She saw her mother's hands, calloused from late shifts. She saw her younger self, scrubbing floors and whispering equations to the silence. She saw Camila, Elijah, Fatima. Every voice that had once asked, "Do I belong?" And in that moment, they all did. That night, back in her hotel room, Nia stood on the balcony, overlooking the Potomac. Ethan joined her, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You ever think we'd end up here?" he asked. She laughed softly. "No. But I never stopped walking." "What's next?" he asked, like he always did. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "We go global." He raised a brow. "Global?" She turned toward him. "Africa. Southeast Asia. Indigenous reservations. Anywhere brilliance has been buried by barriers." He smiled. "Of course. I'll start building the pitch deck." She looked out again at the city skyline. "We're not done," she said. "We're just getting started." Because for Nia, the journey was never about medals, or titles, or even recognition. It was about light. And the more doors she opened, the more she realized. The brightest flame is the one you pass forward. The air in Jackson, Mississippi, was thick with summer heat and cicada hums. The porch boards creaked beneath Nia's feet as she stepped out into the early evening light. She hadn't been back in years, not since her mama passed, not since she buried the memories in work and formulas. Now, standing before the worn White House she once called home, something inside her shifted. She wasn't the scared girl who used to count dinner rolls and wonder how far one could be divided. She wasn't even just a mathematician anymore. She was a bridge, between what was, and what could be. Inside the house, the furniture was covered in linen sheets, but the walls still held echoes. The chipped photo frame of her mother in uniform. A handwritten quote tacked above the kitchen sink. "Keep going. One day, you'll walk through a door that stays open." She sat at the table, the one where she'd once done fractions by candlelight, and opened her journal. Not to solve. To remember. Later that week, Nia stood before the student body of her old high school, Booker T, Washington High. The building had been renovated, but the soul was the same, buzzing, skeptical, alive. The principal, Mr. Clay, introduced her not as a celebrity, but as one of our own. She looked out at the faces, some curious, some bored, a few whispering with their friends. She smiled. She had been one of them. A math nerd in a hand-me-down hoodie. A girl who thought dreams were for other zip codes. She stepped to the mic. When I was 14, she said, I thought being smart meant raising your hand the fastest. A few kids chuckled. But real intelligence isn't about speed. It's about endurance. It's about failing and coming back anyway. It's about finding the answer when the world tells you not to ask the question. She told them about cleaning classrooms at Harvard. About solving equations under fluorescent lights. About the side door and the voices trying to close it. But I kept going, she said. Not because I was fearless. But because fear didn't get to vote on my future. She paused. Then pointed to the math teacher in the corner, Ms. Garner, now gray-haired but still sharp-eyed. She was the first person who told me I didn't have to be invisible. Ms. Garner, you probably don't remember this, but you once stayed after school just to show me how to balance a quadratic. Ms. Garner smiled, her hand pressed to her chest. Thank you, Nia said. The room fell silent, then burst into applause. After the assembly, a boy named Jalen pulled her aside. Thin, tall, hoodie zipped up to his chin. He didn't look her in the eye at first. I like math, he muttered, but I don't think I'm smart enough to do it for real. She nodded slowly. You ever think that about yourself? He asked. All the time, she said. Even last week. His eyes widened. But you won a medal. And before that, she said, I nearly dropped out of college. Twice. Jalen blinked. She handed him a folded piece of paper. It was a code to access open access. Come find us, she said. I think you've got something to say. His hand trembled as he took it. That night, she walked the old neighborhood. The corner store where she used to stretch a dollar bill for hours. The barbershop still blasting blues at dusk. The playground rusting at the edges but full of kids chasing dreams in sneakers too big. Everything had changed. And nothing had. The need was still here. The math was still here. The door. It was still cracking open, one story at a time. A few days later, Nia flew to New York to attend the first ever open access national gathering. It was held in an old factory-turned-tech hub in Brooklyn, buzzing with voices, languages, chalkboards, and digital screens. Hundreds of students from all over the country poured in. Many of whom had once doubted they'd ever leave their zip code. There were panels on applied physics, community data science, and math for climate justice. There was even a coding battle hosted by Camila and a speed theorem jam hosted by Elijah. But the biggest moment came at the end of the second day. Nia was invited to speak, but instead of taking the stage, she passed the mic. One by one, her students stood and told their stories. I used to be scared to talk in class, said Sophia from Houston. Now I teach code to my cousins. I got rejected from 5 colleges, said Malcolm from South Central. Then open access gave me a problem set, and I solved it. Now I'm designing prosthetics. Even Fatima was there. She took the mic last. I thought this would be about math, she said, but it was really about learning that I matter. That I don't have to apologize for being curious. That I don't need permission to belong. Tears ran down Nia's face before she realized they had even come. Because this wasn't her moment. It was theirs. She had simply lit the match. That night, She and Ethan stood on the rooftop of the venue, the city stretching out around them in a sprawl of lights and possibilities. "You're quiet," he said. She nodded. "I'm thinking about my mom." "What do you think she'd say?" Nia turned to him. "I think she'd tell me I kept my promise." He smiled. "What promise?" "To build something bigger than fear." She looked up at the sky, full of stars beyond the city haze. "I used to think the equation was about me, solving my way out," she said. "But now I know, it was never about escape. It was about return." And as the wind curled around them like a whisper, Nia Robinson, once a janitor, now a leader, always a student, understood something simple and deep. Legacy isn't just what you leave behind. It's what you multiply. The air buzzed with anticipation inside Harvard's Sanders Theater. Mahogany arches framed the space, and golden afternoon light streamed through stained glass windows. But what stole the attention wasn't the ornate room, it was the name on the lecture slate. Keynote, Dr. Nia Robinson, The Mathematics of Belonging. For the first time in its 387-year history, Harvard was honoring a janitor not in whispers, but in banners. They hadn't just invited her back. They had called her home. Faculty, alumni, donors, and students filled the seats. Some remembered her from years before, passing quietly through the halls with a mop and a notebook. Others only knew the myth, the janitor who solved an equation no one else could. Fewer knew the whole truth. But today, they were about to hear it. As she stepped onto the stage, wearing a charcoal suit and sneakers with worn soles, the room rose in quiet reverence. She stood behind the podium, then shook her head and stepped away from it. "I used to clean these floors," she said, her voice calm, deliberate. "I learned more here with a broom in my hand than many learn with a title." Some faculty shifted in their chairs. Others leaned in. "When I came to Harvard," she continued, "I didn't have a classroom. I didn't have a seat at the seminar table. But I had questions. I had curiosity. I had the kind of hunger you can't fake." She told them about solving equations in supply closets, about erasing chalkboards not just with rags, but with reverence. "I wasn't invisible. You just weren't looking." A hush fell over the theater. "I didn't become a mathematician when I got published. I became one the night I stayed late to scrub the lecture hall and found a proof written half-finished on the board. I couldn't stop myself, I had to solve it. That's when I knew, genius wears work boots too." Applause erupted. Some stood. A few students shouted, "Yes," from the balconies. She smiled. But her voice grew quieter. "This story is bigger than me. It's about everyone who's been underestimated because they didn't come in through the front door." She paused, then stepped forward. "Let me tell you about Jalen. A student from Mississippi who used to skip math class because he thought no one noticed he was smart. Now he's a teaching assistant at Morehouse, mentoring 5 other students." She let the silence hold. "Let me tell you about Fatima. A first-gen student from Baltimore who thought the only path for someone like her was accounting. Today, she's designing machine learning algorithms for healthcare access." More applause. Open access isn't just a program. It's a proof. A proof that when you open the door, brilliance walks in. She nodded toward the front row, where Ethan, Helena, Camila, and Elijah sat. "And to those who helped build the hinges, thank you. For choosing vision over vanity." Then she turned to the students. "To anyone listening who feels like the outsider, who's cleaning classrooms when you want to be solving the problems inside them, this is your moment. Don't wait for someone to invite you. Show up. Stay late. Ask the question." She stepped back from the mic, because you never know who's listening at 4 a.m. As she exited the stage, the entire audience stood, erupting into a roar that echoed across the stone walls. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Later that evening, Nia found herself alone in the very same hallway where it had all begun. Room 3B. The chalkboard still inside. Now encased in glass. On it, a new inscription had been etched in white marker. This is where Nia Robinson began solving equations and rewriting narratives. April 3, 2015. Underneath, someone had added in smaller handwriting. Every answer starts with a question. She reached out and touched the cool glass. She remembered the loneliness of that first night. The fatigue. The fear. The voice in her head that whispered, "Who do you think you are?" Now she knew. She was someone who never stopped showing up. Someone who knew that the most important equations are the ones that solve people. Back at the hotel, she logged into the open access platform. A message blinked at the top of her inbox. From Elijah. Subject, Ghana. Hey Nia. Just got off a Zoom with the Accra team. They've launched their first pilot class, with 23 students. One of them walked 3 miles just to attend. They're using the translated modules you helped create. Also, Fatima's putting together a curriculum with the South African collective. Oh, and Jalen wants to start a Mississippi summer program. Open Access South. I told him you'd be proud. Rest if you can. The wave is real. And it's moving. Nia leaned back in her chair. She stared at the email for a long moment. And then she smiled. The fire was no longer hers to carry alone. It had leapt. Burned. Spread. Not as destruction, but as light. As invitation. As proof that when the world tells you genius has one face, one voice, one door, you knock anyway. And if they don't answer, you build your own. The train ride back from Boston to New York was unusually quiet. Nia sat by the window, her laptop closed, her phone off, her gaze fixed on the blur of trees and towns flickering past like memories she hadn't asked to revisit. The lecture at Harvard had been a triumph, historic, even. People were calling it the most important keynote of the decade. She had been congratulated by presidents, donors, foundations, scholars from Cambridge to Cape Town. But beneath the applause, something heavier pulsed in her chest. She was tired. Not the kind of tired a good night's sleep could fix, but the deep, bone-level fatigue of someone who had held a door open for too long, hoping others would find the strength to walk through it. Because what no one ever told her was this. You can light 1,000 candles, but eventually, your own wax runs low. Back at her apartment in Brooklyn, Nia stood in the doorway, suitcase in hand, staring at the boxes she had never unpacked. She had moved in 6 months ago, but the place still didn't feel like home. A mattress on the floor. Books stacked in corners. Whiteboards leaning against the wall, covered in scribbled ideas she hadn't touched in weeks. She sank onto the bed, kicked off her shoes, and stared at the ceiling. A notification pinged from her laptop across the room. She ignored it. Another ping. Then another. She exhaled. Eventually, she gave in. It was a message from Ethan. Check your inbox. Something came through from MIT's board. It's big. She clicked through. And there it was, a formal offer for the newly established Nia Robinson Fellowship in Applied Mathematics, a program she hadn't even known they were planning. Fully funded. Named after her. Designed to bring in 10 underserved students a year from across the country. It was the recognition of a lifetime. And all she could feel was exhaustion. She stared at the blinking cursor on the reply email, unsure what to type. How do you say, thank you, when you're not sure if you want more doors? How do you keep moving when the road is paved with applause but no room to rest? A few days later, she visited her mother's grave. It had been too long. The cemetery was quiet, sun dappled through tall oaks, birds humming in low harmonies. She knelt beside the headstone, brushing off leaves with her hands. She hadn't come to say anything profound. Just to talk. "I got a medal, Mama," she said. "They said I'm one of the most influential scientists in the country now. Isn't that something?" Her laugh was dry. Her eyes wet. "But it cost something, you know," she said softly. "I missed birthdays. I skipped funerals. I pushed people away. I didn't date. I didn't breathe." She looked at the stone. "They call it purpose. I call it sacrifice. And I'm not sure who I am without it." A breeze moved through the trees, rustling like whispers. "I remember when you told me, don't let the world harden your joy. But sometimes it's like joy is this thing I gave away to make room for grit." She ran her hand over the headstone again. "I think I want it back." That night, Nia called Helena. They hadn't spoken in a few weeks, too many projects, too many time zones. But Helena answered on the second ring. "Hey, Firestarter," she said, her voice warm. Nia didn't speak for a second. Then she said, "I think I want to disappear for a while." Helena didn't push. She didn't ask why. She just said, "You've earned that." They talked for hours, like they used to when the side door was just a dream on a whiteboard in a borrowed office. "You know," Helena said near the end, "you don't always have to be the face. The movement's bigger than you now." Nia nodded, even though Helena couldn't see it. "Yeah," she whispered. "That's the best part." The next morning, Nia announced she would be stepping back from daily leadership at Open Access. The news hit hard. It was picked up by every major outlet. Robinson resigns to reflect. The face of math steps out of the spotlight. What happens to a movement when its founder rests? But inside the Open Access team, there was no panic. There was pride. Camila sent her a voice note. "You taught us to solve the problems. Now go solve for yourself." Elijah mailed her a drawing from a student in Chicago, Nia in superhero boots, holding a chalkboard that said, "We belong." Fatima sent her a plane ticket. One way. Destination, Dakar. "Come see where the math was born, Nia," her message read. "Come learn again, but this time, for you." 3 weeks later, Nia stood barefoot in the red dust of Senegal, watching a group of children draw equations in the sand. There was no classroom here. No board. No audience. Just sun, wind, and chalk lines made with fingers and sticks. She didn't teach. She watched. She listened. She remembered what it was like to love numbers not for grades, or grants, or glory, but for what they revealed. She sat beside a girl who didn't speak English but understood patterns like poetry. They worked silently together, solving a shape puzzle with smooth stones. And for the first time in a long time, Nia felt something she hadn't allowed herself in years. Stillness. Not idleness. Just presence. She smiled. Maybe this was the equation she had forgotten to solve all along. Purpose equals passion, performance. She whispered the formula aloud, like a secret, like a prayer. And the girl beside her laughed. Not because she understood the words. But because joy needs no translation. It had been exactly 1 year since Nia had stepped away from the spotlight. 1 year since she had decided that rest, reflection, and reclaiming her own joy were just as important as the work she had done to ignite Open Access. The world hadn't paused. The movement hadn't stalled. Instead, it had flourished in ways she could never have imagined. She had given her all to the cause. And now, she was watching it grow without her guidance, without her presence constantly in the background. What she had started as a small spark of hope had become a wildfire of change, spreading across the globe. She sat in the garden of her small home in Brooklyn, watching the early morning light break through the trees. A year ago, the place had felt empty, like a memory trying to find its shape. Now, it was home. The walls told stories, the floors held her steps, and her quiet moments of reflection were now punctuated by laughter. Nia had created space for herself, something she hadn't allowed for so long. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. It was a text from Fatima. "We're launching the curriculum you helped design in Egypt today. 23 students. Can you believe it?" A wide grin spread across Nia's face. The movement was bigger now than it had ever been. Not just in numbers, but in the lives it had touched, in the stories that had been written in its wake. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from the Open Access Board, with a link to a news article. She clicked it. Nia Robinson, the unsung pioneer of the new age of mathematics education. The article was full of the usual accolades, awards, recognition, and an overwhelming sense of admiration for her work. But it also told a new story. A story that went beyond the awards, beyond the keynote speeches, beyond the headlines. It told the story of the people, the students, the teachers, the communities, that Nia had never intended to impact. The article spoke about the legacy she had left behind, the countless lives changed because someone had seen them. Because someone had told them they belonged. As she read through the article, a particular line stood out. Nia Robinson did not just create a platform for education. She created a platform for belonging. Her heart swelled. She had always believed that was the heart of it. That math, science, and learning weren't just about numbers and equations, but about recognizing the value of every individual and making sure they had the opportunity to shine. The phone buzzed again, but this time it was a call. She glanced at the screen and saw Elijah's name. "Hey, Elijah," she answered with a smile. "Hey, Nia," Elijah's voice came through, sounding unusually excited. "I'm in Atlanta right now. You wouldn't believe it. They just announced that open access is going global." "Global?" Nia repeated, sitting up straighter. "What does that mean?" "I mean, we're officially branching out to 20 new countries. From the Caribbean to Southeast Asia. We're going to have programs in places we've never even dreamed of." Nia's breath caught in her throat. "Elijah, that's huge. We can't do it without you," he said, his voice full of gratitude. "You started all of this. You laid the groundwork. It's because of you that we can even think this big." Nia felt a wave of emotion wash over her. It wasn't about her anymore. She could feel it. It wasn't the recognition, the applause, or even the fame that mattered. It was the realization that her work was living on, evolving, growing. "I'm so proud of all of you," she said softly. "All of you have taken the flame and run with it." Elijah laughed. "Well, you're the one who lit the match." Nia looked out the window at the garden outside, the sun rising higher, the light shifting. It was a quiet moment of peace, but it was also a moment of clarity. She had done what she set out to do. She had ignited change, brought people together, and created something that would outlast her. She had given the world a blueprint for what was possible when no one was left behind. Later that day, Nia met with the open access team. It had been months since she'd seen them all in person, but they had kept her in the loop from afar. They filled her in on the developments, on the countries they had expanded into, on the thousands of students who were now benefiting from the programs she had once dreamed of. They spoke of the lives they had touched. Of the kids from rural Kenya who were now learning calculus on their phones, of the young woman in Mumbai who had earned a scholarship to study artificial intelligence at Stanford, of the man from the streets of Rio de Janeiro who was now building algorithms to fight poverty in his community. It was in those moments, sitting across from the faces she had come to love as family, that Nia realized the truth: the impact of her work had never been about the work itself. It had always been about the people. The faces, the names, the lives that were altered simply because someone saw them. Because someone gave them the chance. And now, she understood fully what her mother had meant when she said, "Don't let the world harden your joy." Joy was never about getting recognition. It was about seeing the possibility in others, about helping them believe that they, too, could achieve greatness, no matter where they came from. It was about showing up for the people who needed you most, even when no one else was looking. The next day, Nia got a call from the president of MIT. "We're thinking of adding a new chair to our department. A chair of equity in education," he said. "And we can think of no one more qualified to lead it than you, Nia." Nia paused. It was an offer she couldn't refuse. An offer that felt different from the rest. It wasn't just a position. It was a chance to build something new, something lasting. It was a place where she could finally merge her love for mathematics with her commitment to justice, to equity, to giving every single student the chance to be seen. "I'm honored," she said softly. "But I think it's time for someone else to take the lead. I've been where I needed to be. Now, I get to step back, to give others space to lead." And in that moment, she realized that stepping back didn't mean disappearing. It meant stepping into her true legacy. The one that wasn't tied to a position or a title, but to a mission that would continue long after she was gone. The world would remember her name, of course. But it would remember her story because it was never just about one woman. It was about all the people whose names were never called. Whose voices were never heard. Whose contributions were invisible. It was about giving everyone, no matter their background, the opportunity to be seen. The opportunity to belong. And that, Nia thought, as she sat back and closed her eyes, was the greatest legacy she could ever leave. The house Nia lived in now wasn't big, but it had everything she needed. A narrow front porch where she could sip her coffee in the morning and listen to the world wake up. A small garden that bloomed in uneven patches, exactly how she liked it. And inside, shelves that told stories through books rather than awards. No medals were on display here. No framed magazine covers or honorary degrees. Just sunlit quiet and a stack of notebooks she still filled when the math came whispering in the night. It had been 3 years since she'd stepped away from open access. 3 years since she decided to let the movement live without her hand at the wheel. And in that time, something remarkable had happened. It did. It didn't collapse. It didn't fade. It grew, organically, wildly, stubbornly. From community centers in Detroit to remote schools in Nepal, from prison classrooms in Louisiana to open-air lectures in Lagos, open access had become more than a program. It had become a language. A way for people to say, "I see you. I believe in what you carry." Nia still consulted when asked. Occasionally she'd get an email from a student in Nairobi or a principal in El Paso, thanking her for what she'd started. And sometimes, if the fire inside burned just bright enough, she'd say yes to a guest lecture or an anonymous curriculum review. But mostly, she chose quiet. A new kind of quiet. The kind earned, not forced. One spring morning, she got a letter in the mail. Not an email. Not a tagged post. A real letter, on heavy cream paper, handwritten in blue ink. It was from a girl named Layla in Oakland. Age 16. Dear Dr. Robinson. My math teacher told us your story. At first I didn't believe it. I thought she made it up to make us try harder. A janitor who solved equations at Harvard? Who becomes a doctor and changes the world? That sounded like a movie. Not something that happens to someone like you, or me. But then I read everything. Watched every video. And I saw the way you looked at the chalkboard, like it was something sacred. And for the first time in my life, I thought, maybe I'm not weird for loving numbers. Maybe I'm not crazy for dreaming about patterns no one else sees. Anyway, I wanted to tell you that yesterday I solved a proof our teacher gave us. It was from an old MIT entrance exam. She said no one ever gets it. But I did. I kept thinking about you at 4 a.m. And I stayed with it. I stayed. Thank you for making it possible to imagine more. For all of us. Sincerely. Layla. Nia read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it, pressed it to her heart, and let the tears fall without apology. Somewhere, a 16-year-old girl had stayed with the problem, just like she once had, broom nearby, heart wide open, alone but not lost. And that was everything. Later that evening, Nia walked out to her garden barefoot. The air was warm, humming with cicadas. The tomatoes were ripening on the vine. Somewhere far off, a dog barked and children laughed. The earth smelled of promise. She thought about Layla. And Jalen. And Fatima. And Elijah. She thought about the night the professor caught her writing on that board. The moment everything shifted. She smiled. She still had the chalk. It sat in a drawer in her study. One small, dusty stick of white chalk, kept like a relic from another life. She hadn't used it in years. But sometimes she held it, just to remember how it felt to believe in something no one else could see yet. A breeze moved through the trees. She tilted her head and closed her eyes. If she listened closely, she could still hear the echo of footsteps in a marble hallway. Still hear the hum of fluorescent lights in a room too cold. Still feel the weight of the mop in one hand, the fire in the other. But more than that, she heard this. A million voices rising. Not hers. Theirs. Voices that would never again wait for permission to speak. Hands that would never again wait for the right pen or the right degree. Kids who knew now that genius didn't wear a suit. It wore a uniform. Or second-hand sneakers. Or braids and questions and a stubborn refusal to quit. Nia opened her eyes. The stars were starting to come out. Somewhere, someone was staying up late, grappling with equations, chasing the logic, feeling unseen but unwilling to disappear. And maybe, just maybe, they'd remember her name. Or maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they'd just remember the feeling she left behind. That they mattered. That they were enough. That even side doors lead to extraordinary places. And that sometimes, the janitor doesn't just clean the board. She changes what gets written on it forever. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?